One.
Good. Welcome to the Town Council for our meeting of December 12th. We'll call this meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. And for the agenda, we're just going to remove item 5, the delegation from the curling club. They're not coming tonight, so I'll ask for approval of the agenda. Councillor Lockett and Councillor Burton, thank you. Motion that the agenda for the council meeting of December 12th be approved as amended. All in favor? Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest tonight? Seeing none, we'll move on. We're going to move on to our staff report 118-2022 employee service and board committee member recognition. Under item 4.1, our deputy clerk, Caitlin Mallory, has this report. Ms. Mallory, would you like to go ahead?
Yep. Through you, Mayor Shankar, to council. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming tonight. We are celebrating our employee and board member recognition ceremony. In 2018, council passed a policy for the employee service recognition program. With this, we celebrate our employees' dedication for their years of service to build satisfaction and morale, to celebrate their milestones, and as a form of team building. So this year we will be providing service pins as well as certificates for the staff, and hopefully on an annual basis. It's all nice to get back together now that COVID is hopefully on the out. So it's nice to see your faces, and we're happy to recognize our staff and celebrate them in person. We recognize the following milestones: 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and 30 years. We do have some staff who were unable to attend tonight, but who deserve to be recognized for their achievements. So we have Susan Halo, who celebrated over 30 years at the Prescott Public Library. Linda Doris also has 20 plus years at the Prescott Public Library. Phil Burton has 15 years of experience with the operations crew, but is unable to make it tonight. And in 2022, we celebrated Jane McGuire's retirement. This year, past members of boards and committees that are not returning have been recognized for their contributions. At this time, I would like to invite Mayor Shankar to recognize staff and board members who are in attendance tonight.
Okay, it's a great honor tonight to be able to do this. I think it's a great thing to do, thanking our staff and thanking our volunteers. That's what makes a small town, is a good staff, which is part of the team, and it's great volunteers that give their time with the only return is our gratitude and the town's gratitude. So we really appreciate that. Having said that, Ryan Sobey, come on up. Ryan Sobey has been with the town for 5 years, so we'd like to congratulate him for that. We've got a little scroll for you there, and your 5-year pin. Thank you, Ryan. Ryan's been a
Speech.
I meant to come tease you and tell you to do a speech. Unfortunately, tonight, we do have a retirement, but Gary Minkhorst isn't here today. He put 30 years in with the town. So I just want to see if that's on camera. And we made this nice platform that I'll make sure he gets it. But it's a really nice plaque, and with our gratitude, 30 years of anything is quite an accomplishment. So we really appreciate it. And unfortunately, he's not here, but we'll make sure he gets that. Thank you. So moving forward to the board and committee member recognition. First of all, I'd like to again thank all of you. Thank you for coming. I'm going to read out the ones that are here first. Fraser Washinger, Come on up, sir. For all your commitment to the town. A little slide guide there for you. We have a long meeting tonight, or give you the floor.
Okay, I'll just speak for one
Sure.
So this is in recognition of my work on the Prescott Cemetery Board. I joined the board back in 2012 and have served for 11 seasons now. As most of you know, the cemetery runs about 8 months of the year, 9 months. But during the winter, there's a lot of work to do as well, all the paperwork, all the reports to the province and what have you. So I've been very pleased to do that over the 11 years. It's been a wonderful experience for me. I enjoyed it, particularly since my roots go deep in the town and I know a lot of the history, and going up to the cemetery and conducting burials, often I'd run into people and families that I knew about, and we would have a little talks and things. And so it really aligned nicely with my interests in history. And so I was very grateful for all the support I got from the town, staff, and the boards that we had over the years. It was all a wonderful experience. So thank you.
Valerie Schultz is also on the Prescott Cemetery Board. Thank you for all your service.
I've got Fraser to thank for that because he twisted my arm.
Did. Peter? Is it tomorrow? Is that good? No, it's
No, he's not here.
Peter's not here? Okay. Peter Morrow was also on the cemetery board, so we'd like to acknowledge him. Sandra Eisman. Sandra Eisman was on 2 committees, Committee of Adjustment and Prescott's Heritage Committee. Thank you very much. That's for you. Mr. Stan Kueski from the Prescott Police Services Board, was chair for many years. We appreciate all your hard work, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much. And Darian Watson, come on over from the Prescott Library. Thank you for your many years.
Oh, thank you.
Keeping our library.
And a pleasure to meet you for the
Pleasure.
first time.
Yes, thank you. So the 3 people that aren't here today that I want to recognize, Leslie Bodegani from the Planning Advisory Committee, Jean Burton Fox from the Prescott Library Board, as well as Karen Hume from the Prescott Library Board, Joe Muse from the Prescott Library Board, and Mavis Yale, all from the Prescott Library Board. Another member of the Heritage Committee, Bob Pelda, he was here earlier, but it was a little late for him. And Tom Van Dusen. That's too bad, we don't have cupcakes, so that's why he's not here. And the last person is Megan Winans from the Committee of Adjustment. So again, a big hand for all of them. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for everyone coming tonight. If you want to stay, we only have 3 hours to go. It's so nice.
I got a hair up.
Boy, I figured that, eh? You can change my face spots?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got a book for you for hockey.
Okay.
Keep track of stuff.
I had to keep track of stuff Saturday.
Yeah, I imagine it was.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Tom. Oh, yeah. That sounds important. Very good. It's always nice to recognize our volunteers. It was Volunteer Appreciation 2 weeks ago. So no number 5. Number 6 is minutes of the previous council meeting. Motion reads that the council minutes dated December 5th, 2022 be accepted as presented. Are there any questions about the minutes? No? Can I get a mover? Thank you. And a seconder. Thank you. All in favor? Good. Number 7 is communications and petitions. And you'll see, I got this I got this letter handed to me, and for transparency, I want to bring it to everybody. So it does say Shankar and Counselor. So does anyone want to talk to that letter from the Grenville Condominium Corporation? Matthew?
Very much, Mr. Mayor. So during the last summer, there was a food truck that was just directly beside the condominium corporation. And what we did is committed to taking a review of that particular bylaw in the winter of this year, and with subsequent changes, hopefully for the start of the next season. So that's one of the bylaws that we'll be starting on in January. Taking a look at that, reviewing it, and making some recommendations, and we'll be working with the condominium corp as well to incorporate their concerns that they brought up at that time.
Great. Good. Anyone else? Councilor McConnell?
Well, that was one of those things that, how can I put it? We didn't think about at the time when we sold the museum property. A lot of people didn't realize that there was, I think, 9 or 10 parking spots south of the museum. I actually went with that property, and nothing had ever been on there other than cars parked. And it really didn't occur to us that the owner of the property could or would rent it out to put a couple of food trucks on it. Had we thought of that at the time, I suspect we might have made some kind of a stipulation in the purchase or taken a look at the bylaw that regulates that at the time, but we didn't do it. And so last summer, we had the 2 trucks there, and the one certainly was very well received. People loved the gelato. Unfortunately, if I happen to be one of those people who lived right next door to it in a condominium, I wouldn't be receiving it quite so well. With the radio on and with the people crowding around, and it would take the privacy of your front lawn, which is what it was, away from them. So we have a situation that we're going to have to look at with our bylaw revision, as Mr. Armstrong mentioned. And we're going to have to look at the rights of commercial property owners to do what they want with the property. But we're going to have to also look at what we feel private residences which abut commercial property, how their rights are affected as well. And hopefully we can reach some kind of a compromise that will, I think it's going to satisfy everybody, but we're going to have to take a serious look at it. And because I don't think the situation we had last year was acceptable to me for the people in Prescott Place. Thank you, Mayor Shankar.
Well, I just wanted to add to that because I agree with what you're saying. But most places that have food or serve food of any kind have to have some sort of washroom facility or place to wash your hands. So I think that's something we need to take into consideration if we can move those maybe closer to someplace like the marina that has a washroom and they can wash hands and stuff. I think, I agree though, I wouldn't have been very happy if I had been a resident there.
Anyone else? Yeah, so that's good. I mean, that's something we're going to work on, and we know we got a lot of complaints about that last year, but under the current bylaws, everything was all we could do, but us taking a look at it, and we have some ideas as to where to put food trucks in the future that will be a lot more palatable. Is that your word? Palatable for the people. Food trucks and palatable. So that's it for that. That was just communication.
So that bylaw will be in discussion for all, right?
Oh, yeah.
And when do we expect that one, sorry?
I would expect that probably at the first meeting in February. Is we want to spend some time in January with the condominium court, but as well as taking a look at some other municipalities and some examples there, and then bring it back in February for discussion at council and some further direction as to other changes we could make to it.
Will we be discussing it with the owner of the?
Absolutely.
Yep.
The museum?
The owner of the museum and maybe even the food vendor.
Okay. All right. We'll move on to the consent reports. Is there anything any member of council would like to separate out from the two items in the information package? No? If no one does, I thought that one from the township of Petrolia was probably something we could discuss. We could bring that one back, Matthew? If you're alive. Make it back there. Is that okay? We do that? So the motion is that the items under the consent report minus that first one be accepted as presented. Can I get a mover?
Can I just make a comment before you do that? I will move that, but I think it's interesting to note that for several weeks or several months that we've been getting letters, motions from all kinds of different municipalities regarding this Bill 23. We've discussed it, we moved something along, we passed here, and there seems to be an awful lot of opposition to Bill 23 because there's so much involved in it. And everybody is in favor of building more houses, building them quicker, but having the provincial government and the big brother on this thing and basically running roughshod over the municipalities, I don't think is the way to do it. And it would surprise the heck out of me if these resolutions from other municipalities don't just keep coming ad infinitum, really. So we can just keep supporting each one as they come, or we've already done it once. I don't know.
We have a staff report 12.1 that's quite in depth on Bill 23. So we'll talk about that then.
So I will move that.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk, so are we discussing all letters here? Because Lee jumped to Bill 23. I'm just looking at the township of Malahide, their letter. So are we agreeing to support this?
No, we're just accepting it
The
as
letters,
consent
right?
agenda.
Yep, okay.
Doesn't mean we're,
Yep. Thank you.
unless you want to bring that back out.
I mean, I think there's some legitimate concerns with their letter. The way I read it is they're looking at regulating private residents being set up as grow ops for medical cannabis users. And I don't know what the current regulations are in town or the bylaw, but I think as we get deeper down this hole, we may want to have some kind of regulation or bylaw in place to deal with it, right?
Okay.
It's not that I'm against it, but I think there needs to be some restrictions.
So does this resolution from them or their review, would that fit into what you're thinking?
It would, actually. It looks like they're looking to cover some of their costs and put some teeth into
Okay.
it.
We'll pull this one out too. Is there a motion anymore?
Well, it hasn't been put on the table yet. Staff could be just provided the direction to bring back information on both resolutions.
Okay, that's good. Is that good?
Thank you.
Gloria,
That's right.
if I can just throw one more thing in there in relation to that. Councillor Kirkpatrick brings up a good point with the grow ops, and he referenced home grow ops, but these things that are authorized by the Department of Health that we don't authorize as well. You may remember last term, we had a factory building in town that we had no idea was a grow op, and there was a fire and an explosion there. Our fire department responded and had no idea what they were getting into because of course, the fuel that we're using in there, I think it was butane or something like that, which is highly explosive. So this whole grow op thing is poorly regulated, and I think we need to make that known provincially.
I think that one in the warehouse was an illegal grow op.
I believe it was.
So that's a big difference there.
I disagree with you. I believe it was licensed by the Department of Health. But they don't have to notify us locally when they do that, or at least they didn't at the time, because I remember we complained about it. Fire department complained about it.
Matthew?
So technically, you're both right. So it was a legal grow operation. However, they were not licensed to extract the oil. And the process of extracting oil can become highly flammable. And so it was a bit of both.
It was very diplomatic.
It's Christmas.
That's good information.
You should run for election.
So that takes care of number 8. Number 9 is committee reports. There's no items under committee reports. Number 10 is mayor. Trying to think. I don't have anything to report. Oh, we had our Christmas party. That was good. Christmas staff luncheon. That was a lot of fun. I think everyone was there.
Good.
So that was a lot of fun. Item 11 is outside boards, committees, and commissions. So what we're going to do tonight for under item 11, we just added Councillor Lockett went to Diversity Day in Kentville.
Right.
On Wednesday, December 7th. So she's put out pamphlets to everybody. And I'm going to give Councillor Lockett the floor to tell us about that conference.
Thank you, Corey. It was extremely interesting. First of all, I didn't even know there was a committee in the community. There's 88, I think she said, 88 chapters of immigrations. And the speakers, all of the guest speakers were immigrants. And they went from a student that was an international student last year at BCI to now her family's here, her father's in school and her mother's working. They gave us an outline of how many international students. We have 12 international students right here in South Grenville. Wow. And they gave a little play for how good it would be if you could house an international student and some of the things that would be expected of you. So there's a lot of information there. There was a fellow that spoke that came to Prescott, actually, from the Netherlands. His wife had a job with the Coast Guard, and they started out in Halifax and came here. And what he said was, the best thing that a community can do for immigrants is to welcome them. And he felt very welcome when he came to Prescott. He got a welcome bag of information. And he said that they had a great video. He said movie, great video on their webpage. And he felt very, very welcome here. They also spoke about if you were a professional coming, like whether you were a doctor, a lawyer, a pharmacist, it takes you approximately 4 years to get licensed here. And everything you have to go through. And basically, the pharmacist was saying, with the healthcare situation, there's got to be a better way. You've got a lot of licensed people here in Ontario, and we're just not are not taking advantage of it. So it was very good. They haven't had one since 2019. And they expect to have them every year now. So I would strongly recommend that we participate again next year.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Anyone have questions for Councillor Long?
They did mention the river bus.
Well, did they?
They did mention the river bus and said that it did allow people to work, like if someone lived in Cardinal and wanted to work in Maitland or Brockville or even or Prescott, it was a very good idea and very well used apparently.
That's good.
I'm just going to mention that we'll add their resources to our website and also share their social media posts when they do.
Okay, thanks, Matthew.
That's good. Thank you for going to that. And where was that held?
It was held at Kempful College.
Kemple College.
Ruth, was it attended by folks from Ottawa, like, or just in the Leeds and Grenville area?
I think it was just Leeds, Grenville, Lanark. But somebody did come from Lindsay, and I do think there was someone there from Ottawa. Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Girls Inc., they were all represented.
I think at some point, we're going to have to really push this to solve some of our employment issues locally. Right?
And once we have housing, that was a big component that once we have some housing in areas, especially rural, which they considered us to be, once we had housing in the areas, you would have the employees.
That's a good segue into our next.
There we go.
To our next item on the agenda. Item 12.1, staff report 119-2022. This is for information only. Bill 23, More Homes Built Faster Act. Matthew Armstrong submitted this report. Would you like to speak to it, Matthew?
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this comes from the discussion that we had last week and just wanting to know more information on Bill 23 and what its impacts are. So it affects 10 different pieces of legislation as well as some regulations. And so I'm just going to touch on them at a high level as we go through. More than happy to answer any questions as well. So the Municipal Act, there's been a change to section 99.1, which would allow the Minister of Municipal Housing and Municipal Affairs and Housing to impose additional limits on what a municipality can do to prohibit or regulate demolition and conversion of residential units. Currently, the town of Prescott doesn't have any limits or regulations on that, and so until we see exactly what the minister might propose, then we don't see it necessarily as being an impact. Certainly not an impact on any current regulations that we would have. In terms of the conservation authorities, they would not be permitted to comment on applications coming from the Planning Act, Agri Act, that sort of thing. One thing that I did want to state is that the town of Prescott hasn't been subject to a conservation authority, and it's because we sit outside the watershed of the South Nation River in and of itself. And so from a source water protection perspective, we do abide by South Nation and all the rules they have for source water protection. But then we look to the province when it comes to all of our other applications. So that's really what they're saying for the other municipalities is instead of going to the Conservation Authority to comment on your studies and things like that, then you'll need to have them peer reviewed. We already do that. We follow a peer review process both for engineering as well as all the conservation studies, environmental studies, things like that. And so for us, it's really no change. It's just most of the other municipalities that have relied on the Conservation Authority will no longer be able to do so, and we'll have to do it with our own resources. So for us, it means very little change. For some of those other municipalities, it will mean a significant change. And it doesn't absolve the developer or the town from following all of the guidelines that there currently are and regulation legislation when it comes to the evaluation of lands. And it's only in very specific areas that both the provincial policy statement and our official plan identify when an environmental assessment impact study is required, and that sort of thing. None of that will change. There's a number of other changes in terms of the scope as well as the fees of the Conservation Authority. Again, that's not going to affect the town of Prescott because we don't currently sit within one. So one thing that I really want to point out though is that the changes to the conservation authorities won't change how we process development and what we need to meet in terms of peer review and following the legislation as it sits. So that for us isn't going to change, and it will have the same level of due diligence that is currently there 3 weeks ago or 6 months from now. So that's kind of one of the points that I really want to make on that one. Development charges, community benefit charges, and parkland dedication. So there's a number of new exemptions for the development fees, and that's being affordable housing, nonprofit housing, inclusionary zones, all three of which I think we can agree that if we're trying to provide affordable and nonprofit housing, then adding an additional development fee on top of that doesn't necessarily make sense. And so that's a bit of a contribution that the town can make towards providing that affordable housing unit or the nonprofit housing unit. The town doesn't have any inclusionary zones currently, so that again doesn't affect. There are new definitions around affordable, attainable housing and rental housing developments, all of which we appreciate the province providing additional guidance on and exactly what those mean and what it means to have attainable or affordable housing. Another thing that they've implemented is if development charges are going up. So from one study to the next, currently every 5 years you have to do a study. And if it's going to go up or increase, then you would phase that over 5 years to get to 100% of the full increase. What they've also done is instead of saying that you have to do the study every 5 years, you have to do it every 10 years. And so there again, we appreciate the fact that we don't have to spend the $15,000 to $20,000 every 5 years just to renew. But on the flip side, what they've also done is said that you can't use your previously collected development fees to pay for that study. And so what I'm going to propose is that we put $2,000 aside a year into a reserve. And so at the end of the 10 years, we're able to pay for the study. And just as we were before using development fees. There's also a couple of discounts and caps on interest rate charges, things like that. That's not something that we've entered into previously, so not expected to have a large impact going forward. And then also just taking a look at exactly how we would be able to calculate the development charges. Again, we've never included housing services as part of it. So the fact that it's going to be exempt, it doesn't affect us really going forward. Capital costs that we're including, again, they're changing the definition a bit, but it's not expected to have a significant impact. Community benefit charges are fairly new, and again, they're providing some exemptions to that. We don't currently have community benefit charges, but it's something we will discuss as part of our evaluation when we go through the review in the new year for the development fees and community benefit charges. And then finally, there were some changes around parkland dedication, providing slightly better formulas for us to understand. And then along with that, the parkland bylaws that you have to pass. We currently don't have a parkland bylaw. We just follow the standard rate. And so again, not much change from what they're suggesting here. Ontario Heritage Act changes. So quite a few with this. What they're saying now is that in order to have to add a house to as a heritage designation, it's going to have to meet a certain level of test. Also, if there's two levels of heritage designation. One is a full heritage designation. The second is of cultural heritage interest or value. And so before what we would do is we'd have the designated list, and then we would have the interest of value list. And now they're saying you can do that list, but you have to evaluate it within 2 years of it being on that list as to whether you want to designate it or not. And if you decide not to, then you can't put it back on that list for 5 years. So it can't just be a list with an indefinite timeframe. Now you have to actually do something if we're with those houses and those properties on the list. So again, adding additional clarity around that is helpful for staff. It's going to mean that there'll be a fair amount of extra work for the Heritage Committee to go through those listed properties, determine if they meet the criterion threshold to be on the list. And if they are, then truly do we want to go down the path of designating them to move forward. So again, providing additional details and context and rules around the Heritage Act is helpful so that we know exactly how we can move some of those properties forward. Finally, Ontario Lands Tribunal Act, there's giving some rules for the tribunal to be able to dismiss an appeal if they felt it was being delayed by the party that brought it forward, or that it was unreasonable, frivolous, or vexatious. So our kind of take is anything that allows the tribunal to move forward, get rid of the backlog, to address development appeals quicker is in everyone's best interest, both for the developer, the town, as well as the applicant. Because the last thing we want to do is have it sit there in limbo for 2 or 3 years and then not anything happen, and rather to come to a conclusion and be able to move forward as opposed to sitting in limbo. Planning Act changes, there was a number of ones in here. One is a moratorium on official plans and zoning bylaws that are exempt for a 2-year period. So basically, once you pass your official plan and zoning bylaw, you're not supposed to be able to make amendments to it within the first 2 years. What they're doing is saying for pits and quarries, they're going to make an exception to that. So you would be able to make a change. For us, the town of Prescott, really doesn't make any difference because we have neither pits nor quarries. Next is orders to amend an official plan. So the minister can make a decision to change a municipality's official plan if it's in the interest of the provincial interest and a matter in that vein. And so the ministry currently approves town's official plans and then have full authority to make recommendations and changes to it. So this is kind of between the periods that we normally go through a review that the minister would be able to make a change. Site plan control is being proposed or is being exempted for buildings with 10 or less residential units. That does make a little bit of a change for the town of Prescott. There's not a lot of buildings that we have, 10 or fewer. There's a number, but some of them, a lot of them don't trigger site plan control. So in that case, again, there's not going to be a lot of changes. The one thing that we do find that we'll need to tighten up our zoning bylaw around is the exterior design and in particular landscaping. So that's no longer part of site plan control, and that tends to be a large factor in making sure that a development fits within a particular neighborhood and the overall aesthetic for that neighborhood. And so we'll need to, address it in our zoning bylaw, which is up for rejuvenation in 2023, and just tightening the rules around that. We do have a fair number of rules around exactly what the outside of the building should look like, could look like, as well as the landscaping. And so we just need to make sure that it's a little bit more clear and achieves the desired result that we're trying to get to. There's now distinctions made between upper and lower tier municipalities and the planning responsibilities. That doesn't apply to Prescott because we're a single tier, and therefore we don't have to ask the counties to weigh in on our development applications. And I think we've also touched on the additional residential units and them being able to be added. Ontario Underground Infrastructure Notification System, we do not see that it's going to impact the town of Prescott. New homes construction, again, it's more to do with administrative issues, so not to impact the town specifically. and supporting growth in York and Durham region outside of our area, obviously. The only other item that was a significant change that I forgot to mention was the inability for third parties to appeal consent or minor variance application. And so when we receive, and a consent application is a consent to usually split a property or sever a property. So a lot of times somebody will perhaps a large piece of property, split it into a couple of different lots, and that goes before committee of adjustment. Same with minor variances. If it's minor in nature, then there's a tool that a developer can use to take it to committee of adjustment for them to determine whether it's minor or not, and therefore would approve it. That going forward would mean that third parties would not be able to appeal those decisions. Only the developer, the municipality, and I believe other prescribed parties such as utilities and things like that would be able to have some appeal those decisions. That's a kind of the Cole's notes of there's a lot of changes to this bill. It's what we would call an omnibus bill because it affects so many pieces of legislation. But for the most part, it doesn't affect a lot of what we do and the rules that we would actually need to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, for combining all those different items into one and then making it, important to Prescott and how it affects us and for us to make forward. The one thing that I noted is the financial implications that the reduction in development charges will be made up for by the increase in assessment. So that was good for us. Does anyone have questions for Matthew? Councillor Young?
It's not really a question, but it's just, I agree with Councillor McConnell when he said, that there's so much pushback out there that it's probably something that we should support, from the other things. But it's really concerning to me that something that affects 9 pieces of legislation and regulation can be introduced in October and passed in November, right? It's mind-boggling because you wait and wait and wait for other things to go through and it doesn't happen. The only other thing that kind of made me is the Conservation Authority. Even though it doesn't impact us, they're still taking away that expertise, right? So if you don't have that expertise to rely on, and I know, Matthew, you said that we do peer review, but do we have to pay somebody else to do the work that the Conservation Authority was doing already? So that too I found interesting.
So for the town of Prescott, yes, we have third-party consultants look at it, review it, determine that. So if we belong to a conservation authority, then you would have a yearly levy.
Okay.
And we don't pay nearly as much in our reviews than what the levy would potentially be.
Okay.
Campbell, then Councillor Cook.
Okay. I as well felt it important that we bring this back to the table just because of how many letters out there have been flowing in. And I wasn't sure if we were able to write a letter of support to other communities just to say we're with you. But through you to Matthew, thank you very much for that in-depth report because that was almost beyond the call of duty. I just wanted to talk about it a little bit. It made it very clear to me, but I also have some red flags that maybe we can look at in future. One being the site plan control exempt buildings with 10 or less multi-residential units. So I can see people building something with 11 and being able to have their own timeline on when they can build, when they have to finish, those kind of things. So if we're talking about expanding units, multi-units in the town of Prescott, then we're going to lose that site plan control ability for those kind of buildings. We no longer have public meetings for plan of subdivisions. So if we're thinking of putting in a whole new subdivision, then the public will not be able to express their interest or disinterest for that. If the footprint of the building is not altered, you can have up to 3 residential units in a single structure. So again, with this infilling or more multi-residential, I'm hoping that we can look at the bylaws to see if single residential zoning is the same for these kind of buildings. All of a sudden, you're being surrounded, you're in your happy single home, and all of a sudden you're being surrounded by lots more residential units, which means not only people, but there's cars and parking. The whole pet law, like how many dogs and cats can you have living in these things? It just goes on and on, so. And I'm super concerned about environmental issues. I know we talk about the land that has dead trees, but to me, draining the swamp is not a good idea until we look at it environmentally in terms of climate change, the flora and fauna impacts, and future drainage issues. If you just drain the swamp, the water has to go somewhere. So how we deal with that drainage. So those are my red flags, and hopefully we can deal with them through zoning, changing zoning bylaws or something to that effect. Thank you.
Matthew, did you want to?
Yeah, so in terms of the subdivision and not having a public meeting, we had a similar discussion around site plan control. So site plan control is no longer the authority of council to approve, but for staff. And so what I said during that discussion, and I'd say it here as well, is that it doesn't preclude us continuing to have those meetings and gaining that public feedback. It just is in a slightly different form and a slightly different formality. So when it comes to a plan of subdivision, absolutely, I would say that we would still have a planning advisory committee. We would want to gather as much information and feedback from those that are going to be impacted in their neighborhood, and be able to make a better end result. And so that's certainly what we try to do from a staff perspective, is committing ourselves to being transparent and open and wanting to get that feedback to end up with a really good result. The one about site plan control, I think it's for exempting buildings that are 10 units or less. And so if you're building a sixplex, then you wouldn't be wouldn't have to go through site plan control anymore. But anything over 10, then absolutely would. And then finally, the draining the swamp, and I think you've probably heard that a number of times, refers more to land that is on our eastern border and is predominantly in there. And it's more to do with the fact that some municipal drains that were functioning aren't functioning anymore. And so it caused the whole issue to back up in Edwardsburg Cardinal. But certainly we'll work with them in terms of their plans as they move forward and making sure that it doesn't have a detrimental impact on the lands in Prescott as well.
Thank you. Councilor.
Yes, thank you. Through you. I'd just like to call out that there is 444 municipalities in Ontario, and we've only heard from 9, right? So to say that it's a big concern, right? It's a concern to 9. They're bigger places than Prescott that have more implications to these changes. When I look around Prescott, we need housing. We need people to come to Prescott to generate revenue, get our downtown flowing, take the jobs that are vacant. I don't see anything in this Bill 23 as explained by Matthew as being negative towards Prescott. For me, I wouldn't be supporting a letter to these other counties in support of them. I just wanted to make that clear where I stand on the matter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Anyone else?
An example I know of in town was a group of 6 people moved into one residential rental unit, started operating a car buying and selling repair lot in the driveway. So I'm just hoping when we get these kind of things happening, that we are on top of it. And so you can't really run those kind of things in a residential neighborhood.
Absolutely. And if I may, so there's a couple of things that we need to do. One is, as I was mentioning, the zoning bylaw will really speak to a lot of the landscaping, things like that. Property standards is our other one where you can't run a business in certain areas. The zoning bylaw also speaks to that. And so I think we need to really be cognizant when we're going through the licensing bylaw as well as the zoning bylaw and property standards that we're, addressing all of those and making sure that we have the rules that give us that ability and that authority to step in and say, no, that's absolutely not allowed. And one of the other areas that I did mention in the report is that, a lot of times when you add those additional residential units, they're saying that we can't ask for any more than one more car space or parking space. And, there's a lot of houses that don't even have one, let alone where you're gonna put another two potentially. So again, from a zoning perspective, it's something that we really need to dial in on and say what makes sense. And we've also worked with the parking bylaw to be able to say there's certain lots in town where you can provide overnight parking, in particular in those winter months when we don't have parking between midnight and 7 a.m. And so that you're able to buy a pass and then be able to make sure that your vehicle is off the street. So I absolutely understand and it's something that we are constantly trying to make notes on to be able to say, how do we address this in the zoning bylaw? And then also with these additional residential units, we need to make the point, and hopefully there's enough leeway. We haven't completely seen all of the regulation yet to be able to say, this portion right here, we can't do any more with. It's going to cause an absolute nightmare in terms from a parking perspective or from a density perspective. So here's the areas that it does make sense. And then here's the lots that are sufficiently sized enough to be able to address those parking issues.
Okay. So where do we go from here with this? Matthew, this is just for information only?
It's just for information. If council wishes to endorse one of the letters or that's completely up to them.
Okay. So why don't we think on this and then, Mary, if you want to bring one of the letters that you want council to endorse?
No, I'm fine with, the way this says come through. It's quite evident what Prescott can and cannot do. And, I don't believe our immediate neighbors sent a letter. I don't think Edwardsburg Cardinal did or Augusta. So that would have been my thing, is to support our neighbors, but it hasn't been them. So.
I haven't talked to them about it, so I don't know what they're doing just yet.
I know Elizabethtown Kitley wrote, but they're not an immediate neighbor, so I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. Very good. Okay, we're going to move on to 12.2. Staff Report 120-2022. The Grenville County Police Services Detachment Board proposals. Solicitor General of Ontario, as outlined in Staff Report 120-2022 as option B, consisting of one board representing Marrickville, Wolford, and North Grenville, and one board representing Augusta, Edwardsburg, Cardinal, and Prescott. And that staff be directed to work with partnering board municipalities to develop terms of reference for the board. Can I get a mover and a seconder on this, and then we can discuss it? Councillor Burton and Councillor Kirkby. Did you want to talk to this first, Matthew?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So in 2021, the Solicitor General asked that all municipalities take a look at their current police services board setup and determine how we can perhaps bring them together or reconfigure them in a way that makes sense. So at the time, the 5 municipalities of the Grenville detachment met, had a discussion, and it was felt that North Grenville and Prescott needed their own boards, and Marrickville, Wolford, Augusta, and Edwardsburg Cardinal would sit on a third board. From there, there wasn't unanimous agreement to that, and Augusta put forward another option where North Grenville and Marrickville, Wolford would go together, and then Prescott, Augusta, and Edwardsburg Cardinal would go together on a separate board, or as one board. So it ends up in 2. We just received a notification, I believe, in late October, early November, to say that without unanimous consent and agreement, that they would like us to take another look at that. And so the CAOs had an opportunity to meet in late November, and then we were attempting to also bring together a group of the mayors to have the discussion. But unfortunately, time wasn't allowing for that before Christmas, and the Solicitor General would like to know before December 31st. So two options were generated. Option B, which looks very much like the one put forward by Augusta, where North Granville and Maple Wolf would go together. Excuse me. And Prescott, Augusta, and Edwardsburg Cardinal would form a second board together. Each board would be composed of 9, and in particular, the one that we would sit on, we would have 1 elected official, 1 community representative, and 1 provincial appointee. Provincial appointees have to make up at least 20% of the board. With that, we also discussed a little bit about how the administration would work. And if the chair rotates, one for each of the years, then the administration would rotate with that mayor. So if Augusta's mayor was not necessarily the mayor, but whoever from Augusta, the appointee or the board elected official was on the board, then the Augusta Township would be responsible for the administration for that year. Then the second option was with North Granville being by itself and Mayor Wolford coming with Prescott, Augusta, and Edwardsburg Cardinal. I think based on follow-up conversations that between the mayors, that the preference is for option B as opposed to C, which would see us being paired with Prescott or with Augusta and Edwardsburg Cardinal. We would meet on a quarterly basis, and which I think I missed from the report. I apologize for that. And then we would be able to move that forward. So there's some additional information in there in terms of geography, calls for service, that sort of thing. But in the light that we've spent the last 2 years trying to work with our neighbors in both Augusta and Edwardsburg Cardinal, it does make sense that we take a look at from that perspective. Joining a board. Also, the Granville Detachment is made up of 2 offices of the OPP. One is here in Prescott, the other one in Kemptville. The Kemptville one supports North Granville as well as Norfolk Wolford, and the one here in Prescott supports Edwardsburg Cardinal and Augusta. So from just a logistics perspective, it makes sense. From a partnership perspective, it makes sense, and that's what we bring forward this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Councilor McConnell?
Thank you, Mayor Shankar. Matthew, could you be a little more specific when you said the responsible for the administration? What exactly do you mean by that?
So basically just organizing the meeting, setting up the agenda, having a note taker, someone from the clerk's department there. And so really it's just that sort of thing. Collecting the information from the OPP for the agenda or from any sources that information needs to be collected from. And so it's not all that different than what we do today for our PSP. It's just that it would rotate between the 3 municipalities instead of one municipality having to do it all the time.
Okay, thank you.
A question. Under the suggestions from municipalities, it's they say that they would like to replace the provincial appointees and add additional local community members, but it was my understanding that the provincial appointees are local.
Absolutely. So they are local, but they have to go through a process where they apply to the province. And our experience with that has been that it takes months, if not years, for them to appoint. So having the ability to put their application in to a local municipality and have that decision made fairly quickly would be more beneficial than it going to the province.
I agree. Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else?
So it says, where are we? So elected official, 1 from each municipality. So have we not named 2 people right now?
Well, yes, we have, but that was our current composition. was 5 from Prescott. We had our own service board, police services board, which didn't make sense that we had our own, Augusta had their own, Edwardsburg Cardinal had their own. So you're having 5 meetings a month with the commander and taking away all that time to have these meetings. To me, this makes a lot more sense.
Oh, yeah, no, I just do. We'll have to decide who that elected official is.
You can do that. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Mayor Shankar. Matthew, is there anything like historically that the provincial appointee may bring with them? Like, would they have any access to information that maybe?
They do not. So our understanding is it's just a process that you go through from a provincial, it's vetted from a provincial side, and then they make the appointment. There is no contact with the province after that. So they get the same information and the same perspective.
Okay.
Thank you. I think it's important if we do decide to do this, and it seems reasonable to me, that despite the fact that we have 3 municipalities at one meeting and the OPP giving a report to the 3 municipalities, that the current way we get our information, that is for the town of Prescott, continue, because quite frankly, I really don't care how many break-ins they have in Augusta or Edwardsburg. I'm concerned with how many break-ins we have in Prescott. I'm concerned with how much time is actually spent by the OPP in Prescott doing different things. So I think the importance of the reporting continuing the way it is for each municipality be continued, but they can do 3 within the contents of one meeting.
I think that's the plan, but Matthew?
Absolutely, and so we would still require it by municipality, and really that's what also our billing is based on. So it's really required just on that quarterly basis to go through and say, okay, so what is our trend? How is it looking? Not only from a cost perspective, but also from a trend perspective, to be able to say, what do we need to address? Do we need to spend some additional time in schools? Do we need to address social media and people calling up? I had a family member that got scammed last week. That Amazon called them and said there's a charge, and just went through the whole 9 yards. So it's those types of discussion that's really helpful, and some are going to apply to one municipality. Others of those discussions help from a broader perspective. But absolutely, I agree with you that we need our data specific to Town of Prescott so that we can address the issues as they arise.
Very good. Okay, so any other questions on this matter? I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Twelve point 3 is staff report 121-2022. 3 large-scale infrastructure projects. This is for information only. Matthew, you have it.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So if you remember when we were going through our budget presentation that we were going to talk about large-scale projects this evening, address any questions, comments, concerns that you might have, and then we'll come back on the first meeting in January to discuss them further. So the first project is the Everett Street rehabilitation of the bridge. And so in 2021, we went out to tender to replace the expansion joints, do some structural steel repairs, some rehabilitation to the rocker bearings and things like that. When we went out to tender, it was far higher than what we were expecting when the tenders came in, and we decided to take a step back, not proceed with the project at that time, and determine what our next steps were. And at the same time, when we reevaluated the bridge, we noticed some rapid deterioration in the rocker bearings. And so a steel bridge such as ours, there is movement from lateral when weight as well as temperature and whatnot affects the overall length of the bridge. And each of those steel girders that run across sit on a bearing, which basically is a bit of a concrete structure that is rounded at the bottom, and it can roll from one side to the other. So as the bridge expands or moves or adjusts, that it's able to move slightly. We're talking millimeters as opposed to anything else. But the ones that were underneath the expansion joints at kind of the either end, and there's 4 sets of bearings that are on the bridge. The ones on the either end, with the leaking of the expansion joints, those bearings in particular started to deteriorate rapidly in the course of that 2 years. So when we were taking a step back and saying, you know, those originally were going to be 5 to 10 years out for replacement with its rapid deterioration, we said it's probably going to need to do that sooner. So if we're going to do the expansion joints, there's no reason why you wouldn't do the bearing project at the same time. Since that those bearings were installed, there's now new bearing technology. It's called we're not even going to talk about it. But basically, instead of it rolling, it's 2 pieces of steel, and it has a special coating between, and they're able to slide. So instead of rolling, this one just slides, and it's better for overall movement, and then it's also still compatible with the rocker joints that are in the middle 2 pillars. So what we did is in the course of 2021 and 2022, went back and said, we actually engaged a bridge expert to say, you know, what do we need to do? What is the best method of moving this forward? And what are the things that we need to take a look at when we're doing this type of project? And that's what you have in front of you this evening. So it's replacing those outside bearings, doing all of the same scope of work that was part of the first project, and then being able to do this in 2023. We made sure that by not doing it in 2021 in the expansion joints, that it wasn't going to have imminent failure. We were still good from that perspective. But 2023 is the year in which we want to address it. So the overall cost, excuse me, is expected to be about $1.1 million. And with our increase in OSIF funding in 2022, we decided to put that extra amount towards the bridge for 2022 and 2023, as well as we took the $275,000 that we were going to spend in 2021 on the bridge. And then in 2022 and for 2023, put another $152,000 from that dedicated reserve. So that's how we're able to come up to the 1.1 million and to be able to support the overall project. So I'm just going to stop there because that mostly covers the bridge. So more than happy to answer any questions and maybe take a drink of water while
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for, there we go, Councilor Campbell?
You, Mayor Shankar, is it possible to have the sidewalk on both sides while we're doing this?
So not without expanding the bridge.
Okay.
And so it's really the south side of the bridge that is the issue. And because it's so narrow on that side, and the bridge itself is really only the 2 parts between where the parts come up, and it's the connecting part in between. So we can look in terms of future and what that would mean, but we're probably into the millions of dollars to just expand that one side. What it does allow us to do is, so there's kind of 2 sections of work that they'll need to do. The first part is kind of addressing some of the concrete work, some of the guardrails, things like that. And because we have some extra space on the north side of the bridge, on the southbound lane, so to speak, they're able to do most of their laydown work while they're doing that part of the project. When they go to do the expansion joints and the lifting of the bridge, then they'll move up onto the bridge deck itself and only have to close one lane at a time, except for 4 2 to 3 day periods where they'll have to lift each end of the bridge to alleviate the pressure on the bearings, put in temporary bearings, drop it back down, then lift it back up for when they install the brand new bearings, and then remove the temporary bearings. So they have to do that both times on each end. But it's certainly, we want to minimize that as much as humanly possible.
Councillor Young, then Councillor McConnell.
Matthew, is there a cushion built into this estimated?
There's a little bit of a cushion. We really don't know what, right now the market is just exceedingly volatile. And so we don't exactly know what that's going to look like, but that's why we would like to get it out in that January timeframe so that we know as soon as possible what that's going to look.
Thank you.
Councillor McConnell.
Thank you, Mayor Shankar. The closure of the bridge entirely for 2 or 3 days at a time is obviously going to be a problem. And I know we discussed this last term, whether to close it for a month and get it over with or do it this way. My concern is this is going 4 to 5 months. The school from grade 7 to 12 is north of the tracks, and a great deal of our housing is south of the tracks. And there's an awful lot of kids that walk over the tracks every day to school. So I don't know how they can schedule this, whether this thing can be lifted in the summer when the schools are closed or not, but we should be making every effort to try and do it that way. I mean, it's going to be aggravating enough for somebody that lives on the corner of Wood and Edward to either walk the boundary, cross, come back up to get the groceries if they have to do it for 2 or 3 days, or go the other way and up around Sophia. But the timing of the closures, I think, is going to be very, very important. And I think we should try to address it as much as possible in the when we go to tender it.
Completely agree. And so because they have to do that starting, we hope that will happen in May, June, then be able to do the majority of the lifting, if not all of the lifting in the course of the summer. So that way we're able to get outside of that period. Also, would try and take advantage of, if there's a PA day, things like that, that if we do have to do it in that school timeframe, that we take advantage.
That's be tough to do, but I think we'll try and do it the best we can. Anyone else on this report?
Sorry.
Oh, you want to go to the next one? Yep, sorry.
So the water tower was built in the 1970s. It was using a technology at the time that was thought to be innovative. And so instead of, usually you have the tension wires that are within the concrete, and usually they would run in a conduit. So you would be able to measure, how the tension wires are doing, that sort of thing. This particular technology encased them in concrete. And so you can't tell the state of the tension wires. So it has failed in at least 2 other communities that were that had this type of technology used, and ours isn't showing any sign of major issue at the moment, but it does need to be replaced. It's at the end of its useful life. So when we were going through the joint needs study and land use analysis with our neighbors in Augusta, we also realized that the current rating capacity of the tower at 2,270 cubic meters is quite a bit smaller than our current needs at 3,860 cubic meters. So when we talk about capacities, not only does it have to equalize the pressure in the system, but it also works with our fire water storage as well as emergency storage. So if the water treatment plant was to go down for a period of time, we needed a sufficient amount of water to allow for repairs, that sort of thing to occur. So, excuse me. In September of 2021, there was a funding, infrastructure funding program that was announced for the green stream, and water towers and water reservoirs were part of that overall intake. So we paired with Augusta in that application, and we were approved for 73.33% of the cost for eligible costs. So our current estimate is about 6.9 million, and of which about 5.1 million would come from the province. When we sold the medical center at 555 King Street, that amount went into reserve to help support the water tower replacement. as well as the Township of Augusta through their Augusta Landings connection with the town of Prescott, providing $90,000 to put towards the water tower. So as a result, there's about 1.5 million that we can either use to fund from reserves or debt. And if we're going to use debt, then you could take a 5 or 10-year loan to Infrastructure Ontario, which has very attractive interest rates because you're able to use the interest rates in the province as opposed to the bank interest rates, and able to pay it off over a short amount of time through what we generate from water and sewer revenue. So that particular project has a little bit more work to do in terms of engineering, determining the exact size, those types of things. So we won't be seeking approval on January 3rd for that, but it's certainly one of the projects we want to get going in 2023 and have it potentially finished by 2024. If, again, the market is extremely volatile, and so if it comes back that it's an extremely high price, it might behoove us to wait a year or two, depending if the federal government allows it. But we have to have the project completed by 2026 for funding purposes. But it might be something that we can move a year here or there if it's going to help alleviate some of the costs, just because the amount of volatility in the market right now is extreme.
Okay, hold on a minute. Lots of questions. There we go, Council Burton, then Kirkby, then McConnell.
Thank you. Interesting idea is I've seen in other municipalities that they're putting a design on their water tower.
Oh.
So I think it would be something that would be that we could look at down the road.
So I would suggest that we do it now because once they're up there and if they're doing their thing and whatnot, and if you include it as part of the overall tender, then you might be able to get a little bit of a warranty out of it. But absolutely, I think because of where it's going to be placed, and I think I may have forgot to mention that, is right at the corner of Sophia and Churchill, which will be basically at our new recreation complex. It's really easy to see from the 401. And so we want to be able to use it as a bit of a marketing tool at the same time. And so having a really unique design on the outside of it, whether that's, the town of Prescott, the stone signs that we have and what that cityscape look like or something else, then I think it's really a great opportunity to, we don't have high costs to be able to have that.
Is that something that we could direct staff to look into?
Absolutely.
I think that's an amazing idea. So people are going to see it from the 401 and be directed right to our big recreational complex. And what better way to do a big arrow? Yeah. Or even a hockey player. Imagine that. That's something that we can.
Councillor Kirkby?
Yeah, sorry, Matt. When you're talking about the size of it, are we looking at the capacity to support, say, a subdivision in Augusta right next that butts up to Sophia and future development? Like, is there, when they give you the, I guess, the size of the water tower, do they give you a rough estimation or break it down into layman terms to how many homes that could support you?
Absolutely. So you're exactly right. If we're going to build the water tower, we want to build a little bit of future development into it, because the last thing we want to do is build a water tower and then turn around and say, oh, by the way, we need 1,000 more cubic meters. So it's a gentle balance between incremental cost and where that starts to really jump. So we will try to size it as large as possible. And then when it becomes cost pervasive to add another 1,000 or 500 cubic meters, then we would back off at that point. So, but absolutely, we want to make sure that it's sufficient enough for our current uses, sufficient enough for our growth. And then as we move into getting beyond our border, then we'll also have to look at some other types of programs and storage facilities. So you can use, from a fire perspective and emergency storage perspective, in-ground reservoirs and be able to support that. So perhaps that's something that we would do over in Augusta. to be able to put something in underground, maybe under a park, that sort of thing, so that it's there if it's needed, but it only just sits there in a storage capacity as opposed to elevating it and that sort of thing. So definitely we want enough for our own usage, enough for our continued expansion and beyond our borders and in our borders. But then there comes a point when it's just cheaper to start to put it in the ground.
Right. And so we support the Edwardsburg Cardinal, help me out here, in industry section, right? Industrial section. Is there any interest from them or Augusta adding some funds to the water tower, or have they provided any information talking to their users down there about expanding services or the need for more water?
So in particular with Edwardsburg Cardinal, they have an agreement with us that they've got a certain capacity, both water treatment as well as wastewater treatment. And so they're not currently using up all of that capacity, but if they go beyond it, then absolutely they have to contribute more capital to the overall to replace the capacity that they're using, which is the same concept that we did with Augusta Landings, basically charging for what it would cost to implement that new capacity. As we move forward, there is a capital cost that municipalities will contribute to be able to take on or have more capacity come into their municipality. So that will help support the water tower as we move forward. So let's say we continue working with Augusta and they have a development of 300 or 400 new homes, we would get a large influx of capital, which would then help support the water tower project. And again, we would be able to then say, now we're able to support the water tower, but we also maybe need to add some in-ground reservoir to be able to support the overall capacity. Because equalization is part of the equation, but it's also kind of that for fire emergency or fire storage as well as emergency.
Thank you. Sorry, one last one. Is there a timeline, on the start to finish?
So it'll take about 16 to 18 months from start to finish.
And that does not include the demolition of the current one?
In the 6.9, the estimate, it includes that.
Okay.
That one's going to be a tricky job, simply because of where it is and how little space there is around there. But it has been done before, and we'll include doing that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, sell tickets to that. That will be fun.
It'll be a fundraiser for the.
Councillor McConnell, and then I'll come back to Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor Schenker. My question was already asked
Thank you.
and answered.
Good. Councillor Campbell?
Time-wise, it's able to be built safely with everyone coming into the new arena and.
Yes, absolutely. So that's definitely something that we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to pave anything or construct anything that and then we have to rip it back up. So not a concern from that perspective. It really will tend to be a little bit more localized in how they build it up. So we're not too concerned from that.
Thank you, Mayor Shankar. Matthew, would you be looking at a motion tonight to look at the cost of creating a design for the water tower?
No, I'll just take the direction and the feedback. So that's really when I provide reports for information, and this is for everyone, is that the feedback that you give me then goes into how we move forward. So if you want, you can do a motion, but at the same time, I have it written down as soon as I write it down. And then we will add it in to make sure that when we come back with our next report, to be able to say, this is the cost implication and this is what it could possibly look like.
I have one.
Okay. Councillor Lockett, then Councillor McConnell.
Through you to Matthew, I like the logic of waiting until things calm down if possible. But when you're saying that it's encased in concrete, you can't really tell. So if it absolutely died 3 months from now, what are our options?
So from an emergency perspective, and before there was a water tower, there was high pressure pumps, is my understanding, at the water treatment plant itself. And that's what maintained the overall pressure before there was the water tower. So from an equalization perspective, I think we would be able to support that. We definitely need to make sure that we have plans in place to support fire. Now we would be able to.
Thank you. Thanks.
Councilor McConnell?
Thanks, Mayor Shankar. In your exploration of this subject so far, is there any specific construction type of water tower that are we just throwing it open and we're looking for submissions, or are we zeroing in? I presume we've had some engineering reports on this type of thing. Are there recommendations, like are we metal, fiberglass, cement, what?
So there's a couple of manufacturers out there of water towers that it's a very specialized group. Landmark does a lot of work in Ontario and throughout Canada. And they provide kind of a concrete base, and then it's a steel container on top, but it's lined in glass. And so that cuts down on the amount of corrosion, that sort of thing. There are other options out there. What we're trying to do from an engineering perspective is identify how big we need in terms of the number of cubic meters, providing some direction in terms of how it's going to be built, where it's going to be built. We've already done the geotechnical information to know how far down the bedrock is, that sort of thing. And then what some of the options are. So there's options that mix around the water within the storage tank itself, helps keep it from going stale or moving the chlorine around, things like that. So that's mostly what we've been focusing on, knowing that Landmark does a lot of work, but at the same time, we're completely open to ones that might be of similar quality and functionality. It really comes down to what we're looking at in terms of price. And when you have one dominant player, then sometimes price can crazy ways.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? I just have a question, Matthew. If we're going to push it back a year, should we get it reassessed?
Absolutely. So we would, depending on if we go out to tender and the amounts come back and it's just not something that's palatable, then as part of that discussion, we would get it reassessed and make sure there's nothing that's imminent as far as we can see, and then make that decision with council.
Okay. And my second question is the infrastructure loan. I mean, if the way the markets are going, they're probably the highest they're going to be right now. And maybe in a year from now, that will be lower too.
So with Infrastructure Ontario, it provides the ability to take a construction loan, and then you have to take the debenture out. So during the construction loan, you pay less than prime. And then when you actually decide to take the debenture out, you have to do it within 5 years of taking that construction loan. So at that point, you're able to perhaps wait a little bit longer if the trend is that markets and interest rates are going down, then being able to use that construction loan for a few more months and then taking out the debenture, which locks it in for the life of the loan.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have any more questions?
I just like it to be like a diamond shape.
If that's an option,
But B for Prescott.
to be perfectly honest, we do want to make it, whether we do that in the shape or in the external graphics, something that you can say, I drove past that, just like the Apple up by Toronto, is that, that was pretty cool. And so, it just keeps in everyone's mind. And when you're that close to the 401, then why not take advantage of it?
Absolutely.
I think having a visage of our mayor facing 401 head would be no?
Digital screen.
Have crashes because the
Just a
bridge is going to be closed.
Moving along. All right, guess what? This is 12.4, staff report 122-2022-2023. the operational budget, the health and social services. This is gonna be, the report's gonna be given to us by our deputy treasurer, Jessica Crawford. Don't be shy, don't be nervous.
No, just on the.
This one,
Report up.
the next slide.
Yeah.
So tonight we're going to be looking at the budget timelines and the budget for health services and social services. So for timelines tonight, we're looking at health services, social services, and as Matthew just reviewed, the large-scale infrastructure projects. January 3rd, we'll be looking at administration and protective services as well as approval of the large-scale infrastructure projects. January 16th, we'll be taking a look at transportation, park and recreation, and review initial project list for feedback. February 6th is the environmental budget, the water and wastewater, and planning and development. February 21st, we'll take a look at the revenue side and taxation, as well as prioritize the project list. And our final budget meeting will be on March 6th, operational budget review and alignment, and as well as a project budget review and alignment. So for health services, we're looking at the Leeds and Grumble Landmark District Health Unit, paramedic services, and our cemetery. So first we're going to talk about public health. So public health is provided to the town by the Leeds Grenville and Landmark District Health Unit. Municipalities are required to cost share with the province on mandatory programs. The allocation of shared costs between municipalities is based on the census population. So in Ontario, these services are delivered in communities by 36 local health units, and each is governed by a board of health. Boards are made up of municipal members, either elected officials or community representatives, and a provincial appointee is also requested. So our council representation is Councillor Lockett, who sits on the Public Health Unit Board. Next, we're going to take a look at or talk about paramedic services. So paramedic services is provided by the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville. So they receive a land ambulance services grant of 50% from the province of their approved operational expenses. There is a cost sharing agreement between the counties and the 3 single tier municipalities. The formula is distributed and based on weighted assessment, and with a breakdown of Prescott being 2.68%, Kananaquai 4.43%, Brockport 8.46%, and the United Counties 74.43%. So I do want to just mention here that so the lower tier municipalities of the United Counties, they receive an additional tax on their tax bills in proportion for their joint services, where single tier municipalities such as ourselves are charged a levy, which is included in our operational budget, which we're talking about tonight. So for the 2022 budget for paramedic services, revenue was 9.3 million, expenses including amortization 18.3 million, and so the net expense we shared was 18.9 million or 8.9 million. And our representative council who sits on the United Counties Joint Services Committee is Mayor Shankar. Next, we're discussing cemetery. So the board is a non-for-profit organization and a local board of the Corporation of Prescott. So in 2011, the church has turned over the management of the cemetery to the town of Prescott. At this point in time, the cemetery passed internal bylaws in 2012 to establish and adopt rules and regulations to govern the cemetery. And in 2016, the town of Prescott passed a bylaw to establish the Prescott Cemetery Board of Management. So the main revenues that the cemetery, which they see, are the sale of internment rights and
The second is the grant that's given by the town, $14,000 has been since 2020. And their main expenses are grounds maintenance of Sandy Hill is completed by a third-party contractor who maintains the grounds as well as repairs the burial sites. Just the insurance to protect the property of the interment rights holder and also supplies and maintenance of the upkeep of the pathways and the cemetery itself. The cemetery is required to establish a trust fund for ongoing care and maintenance. If the board were to cease operations, the balance of the trust as of December 31st, 2021 was $118,600. And the representative from council who sits on the cemetery board is Councillor McConnell. Okay, so this is just taking a high level review of the health services expenses for 2023 budget. So looking at the public health, we haven't received a confirmation of what we can expect for an increase. We are assuming a 5% increase. This estimate will increase the budget to budget amount from 2022 to 2023 of $4,337. The counties have also we haven't received confirmation from them as of yet as what we can expect for an increase. So we are assuming 5% here as well. The estimate will increase the budget to budget amount from 2022 to 2023 of $12,000.39. And for the cemetery, we're assuming no change to the grant that we provided, $14,000. We have been providing this grant to the board since 2020, and it has been sufficient to cover the operating expenses, and the board hasn't indicated any plans for any capital projects in 2023. So summing up these three projects, we are estimating an increase of $16,376 from budget to budget and a percent change of 4.8. So next we're going to talk about social services, Ontario Works, St. Lawrence Lodge, Children's Services, and Community Housing. So the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville is a service provider for the Ontario Works program for Leeds and Grenville. So looking at the Ontario Works 2022 budget, the revenue was 19.8 million, expenses including amortization for 22 million, and the net expense to be shared was 2.2. So the allocation is based on 50% caseload and 50% weighted property assessment. The 2022 allocation was 5.63% for Prescott, 5.45% for Gananoque, 32.07% for Brockville, and 56.85% for the United Counties. And our representative council who sits on the United Counties Joint Services Committee is Mayor Shankar. Next, we're going to take a look at the St. Lawrence Lodge. It was established in 1967. The original building opened its doors in 1970. In 2006, it opened a 224-bed facility. It operated in partnership with the City of Brockville, the United Counties, and Town of Prescott, as well as Town of Gananoque, in conjunction with the Provincial Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care and the Southeast Local Health Integrated Network. So the cost allocation is based on a 5-year running average of resident days from each area. In 2022, Prescott's allocation was 183,883, which represents about 8% of the total. So the four partners also provide debt funding that was used to build the current 224-bed facility. This is yearly amount of $220,235, which is partially offset by provincial funding of $80,500. The debt payments will end in 2024 and 2025, as will be offset funding.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Through you, I sat on that board for 8 years. And the last term that I sat on the board, which wasn't the last council term, but the term before, the word from the province was not only did we have to pay off the building that was there, the loan, and as you mentioned, we're getting a grant from the province to partially cover that, but we also had to put money aside to replace the building. In other words, we're putting a double amount away. Can you find out whether we're going to get anything to compensate for that, or if that is still the, what's going on or what's going to go on. I don't know what's happened in the last 4 years.
Yeah, certainly we'll address that as part of the budget process and I agree, we need to know what's gonna happen in 24, 25, so that we understand how that one's flowed.
Thank you.
And just the last point here, that council ordinance that's on the St. Lawrence Lodge Committee of Management. Children's services, provided by the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville. So this service is primarily funded by the Ministry of Education. The department provides a dual role of service system management and program service delivery. The 2022 budget for children's services revenue 9.7 million, expenses including amortization 10.3 million, and the net expense to be shared was 664,759. And the cost allocation is based on 50% caseload and 50% weighted property assessments. And in 2022, this allocation looked like Prescott with 6.16%, Gananoque 5.53%, Brockville 29.88%, and the county's 58.43%. And again, the council representation is Mayor Shankar.
Councilor Workman?
Thank you. Do we know how often that the cost sharing agreements get reassessed through the municipalities?
So in terms of, so each year, they ask for information in terms of the assessment, weighted assessment, those types of things, and recalculate that overall formula. However, the formula itself hasn't been reviewed, I think it's going on 15, 20 years. And that was a issue that we brought up on the last council, and something that I think the single tier municipalities would like to have a discussion about going forward with joint services. Because I think there is some, perhaps different ideas around how we could actually change those services to balance it out a little bit.
Thank you.
So I think I mentioned that Mayor Shankar sits on the Joint Services Committee. All right, so next, community housing. This is also provided by the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville. The 2022 budget for community housing, so revenue 7.5 million, expenses in 2.7 million, and the net expense to be shared was 6.2 million. So there is a cost sharing agreement between the United Counties and the 3 single tier municipalities, and it is based on the weighted property assessment. And in 2022, it was split. So Prescott having 2.68%, Gananoque 4.43%, Brockville 18.46%, and the United Counties 74.43%. And again, our Mayor Shankar sits on the Joint Services Committee. All right, so we're going to take a look at the high-level review of these 4 budgets. So for Ontario Works, again, we haven't seen any final numbers from the United Counties, so we have put an estimate at 5%, which a budget-to-budget change of 6,868. And for St. Lawrence Lodge, we also haven't received any final numbers, so we have also put in an estimate of 5%. And I just wanted to note that this is just on the levy portion and not on the debt for St. Lawrence Lodge. And again, with childcare, we have put in place a 5%. Sorry, did I mention that the budget for St. Lawrence Lodge is 9,194. And so for childcare, we did put in the estimate of 5% increase. So that budget to budget change is 1,964. And lastly, community housing, again, we've put in an estimate of 5%, which a budget to budget increase of 8,342. So taking a look at all 4 budgets, we are looking at an increase from budget to budget of 26,368 and a percent change of 3.47. So this is just a summary of the 7 budgets that we just reviewed, a total change from budget to budget of 42,744, which is a percent increase of 3.85. And there's just a few things that I wanted to note. So for joint services, these budgets may vary. Some may be more than 5%, some might be less. But overall, over those services, we are expecting an increase of 5%, which is what we've seen throughout this presentation. And lastly, I just wanted to know that this portion of the budget does approximate about 10% of the total operating budget, which we talked about last week, that you guys wanted to see kind of, because we do break it up into different segments, so just to give you guys an idea. So the increase change is 3.85% for 10% of the total operating budget.
Thank you, Ms. Shankar. When do you typically receive like budget or the forecast from these agencies?
So for joint services, I believe they'll have their first meeting at the beginning of January. And I would expect them to finish their budget deliberations by most likely early March.
Okay.
So we will know at least what the preliminary is towards the beginning of January. And as we start getting a little bit further on the budget, I'll start making those adjustments as we go through.
Okay.
When it comes to St. Lawrence Lodge, their funding year runs from April to March, but their fiscal year runs from December or January to December. So it's a little bit of a quasi setup there. But they will have know their final numbers probably in February, which Sean will update as well. Those are the two, and then public health, normally we would know in December, but because there's a change in the board with new members of council joining, then we'll probably know in the January timeframe, and they'll pass theirs in February.
Thank you.
These tend to be the ones where obviously the most boring. So there's not a lot of wiggle room on these. It's what we're given, it is what we have to pay. And there's not to say, oh, we're not going to pay public health this year, or we're going to pay a different amount. So this portion of the budget is very much a fixed portion. So that's why it's crucial when you sit on those boards and committees that you're kind of thinking about, what does this have an impact on Prescott, and then being able to feed that back to staff so that we know what the impacts and challenges might be.
Matthew, do you mind, Matthew or Jessica, just explain the difference between budget to budget and budget to projection, please?
Certainly. So budget to budget is, so usually when we're making increases for inflationary purposes, we take a look and we add it back to the budget. When we are taking a look at the projection, there's certain points throughout the year. So in August, with the August numbers, the United Counties provided a projection to the end of the year. So that's what you see in front of you for those 4 portions of our budget. And so some are going to be a little bit higher, some are going to be a little bit lower. Overall, we always go back to budget. So when, for inflationary purposes, we go back to budget. When we go looking at projection, we're trying to say, is there some one-time things that would then incorporate into following years, or are they one-time things that are truly one-time and are just going to be a blip, either high or low, that will allow us to move forward? So a lot of times, in particular with the ones from joint services, when it comes to, let's say, Ontario Works or Children's Services, it might just be the effect of COVID funding will drive down some of those costs and we'll get a 1-year benefit. But then when we have paramedics where they might be adding new programs, they make a decision in the course of the 2022 budget, and they might reap the reward of not implementing that program towards the end of the year, but will have a full year effect when you get to 2023. So sometimes there'll be pluses and there'll be minuses. As they're going through, if they have to provide some emergency funds for a particular program, then it might, again, just be a blip. So those are the types of things that we always look at to be able to say, is there some ability to either shave some off the budget because we're going to have permanent efficiency, or is it something that we need to look at from an ongoing perspective to perhaps, add more because the price of X, Y, or Z is just now at a new market rate that it wasn't when we considered the budget.
Great, thank you. All right, is there anything else, Jessica?
No, just that our next budget will be when we return after Christmas, so January 3rd, and the topics we're going to be looking at are administration and protective services.
Thank you. Any other questions for Matthew or Jessica? Yeah, Councillor Campbell?
I'm just curious to know, in the cemetery, when a stone is cracked in half and on the ground, is it the family that pays for that, or is that part of the maintenance of the?
Insurance.
So I think depends on the history and exactly when, but we can come back on that one and kind of take a look at their operational bylaws to be able to say exactly how that works.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Very good. We'll move on to the next staff report about the museum update and the winter hours. So the motion reads, council approve the request for the museum and visitor center to remain open from December 16th through to April 29th, Thursdays to Saturdays from 11 to 5. Can I get a mover and a seconder on this one, and then we'll get it. Thank you, Councillor Young and Councillor Burton, thank you. So Matthew?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So we sat down and took a look at what we've accomplished in the last couple of months in terms of digitization and just being able to provide that extra time open for the museum and visitor center on the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of each week. It obviously from the summer months that it's a lot fewer that come in on a weekly basis, but we're making some really good headway on being able to digitize the entire collection. And our next step is actually, once that's completed, moving it all online so that you'd be able to actually visit our website, browse through the collection, understand some of the artifacts that are there. So it's a slow process, being able to document, taking the necessary pictures, all of that type of thing. But we are making progress and having some success with that. So really what we are putting in front of you this evening is being able to continue that work, continuing from December through the end of April. And then we would expect it to open 5 days or 6 days a week when we get to May again, and being able to provide some of the services that we did this year. So total cost for this moving forward for the next 4 months would be approximately $5,500. If there's no addition to the budget from this year's for recreation and culture, then we would be able to fit within the overall budget dollars that we had, similar to 2022, and be able to support that ongoing initiative. Thank you.
Great. Councillor Kirkby, then Councillor Burton, and Councillor Young.
Matthew, through you, Mayor, when you say 5,500, is that including salaries that we pay for staff down there? Yep.
Absolutely. So it's just 3 days a week. And so we're able to support that with $5,500.
Do you know if there would be any continuation of the farmers market stalls set up in there during this time?
We can certainly look at that. I think we're always looking at new ways to kind of continue that, but certainly it's something that we could go back and take a look at.
Perfect, thank you.
Councillor Burton?
Thank you, Mayor Shankar. I had an opportunity to elf the town with Santa and Mrs. Claus Friday night. There was 3 tables set up in our visitor museum center. There was a lot of foot traffic. There Friday night. I think it also gives us an opportunity for the schools to come in and see what we have. And our Prescott swag is there. So I did purchase some Prescott swag, got a new toque and a new little sweatshirt and I actually had a friend, they had visitors from New Brunswick and they came down to our visitors center and they spent 2.5 hours. Yeah, it was amazing, they said. And friends of ours that lived in town for the last 10, 15 years. So there's a lot of things in there that they didn't even know was part of our history. So yeah, it's a great place and I think we should definitely keep it open. So I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Councillor Young?
Thank you, Mayor Shankar. I think there's a lot of great stuff too. One thing is consistency. If people know that it's open and it's always open at those times, you're going to get people going back. And the other thing is working on a marketing plan. I think that was part of the report too. And I think that's really important, getting ready for tourism season for sure, because that's another big piece to generating some revenue for the town for sure. So I would definitely support keeping it open.
Good. Anyone else?
So is this, are some full-time staff housed there?
There's 2 full-time economic development staff in the back room. They're more supporting businesses, that sort of thing. Whereas this particular individual more focuses on the museum and the collection and the development of that.
So all this work is being done by that part-time
That's correct.
person, not the 2 full-time staff people? Okay. I was just thinking, she's sitting there waiting for people he or she is sitting there waiting for people to come in and not doing anything else, but.
Nope, and so that's very much, she takes that opportunity to focus on the digitization of the collection, continuing to refine the collection, working with Fraser Lassinger, works as a curator for the museum. And so definitely there's more than enough time and work to keep her busy and tasks oriented, whereas you're not having to wait on somebody coming in. Somebody coming in ends up as being the interruptions to the work that we're trying to focus on. Welcomed interruptions.
I was just going to say that.
All right, any other questions on this motion? So I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Sounds good. Thank you.
Want to note for council, I think that's the most number of staff reports we have ever produced in a year.
In a week?
In the entire year.
Oh, the 123?
120 now, so we're not aiming to eclipse that every year, but.
Never say never.
Appreciate your hard work though.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
For sure.
To have 5 reports in 1 week, that's pretty amazing. Okay, so we're moving along. There's no resolutions, no bylaws, no items under new business, unless anyone has one. Nope. The 16 is Councillor Young has a notice of motion regarding the extension of the Ontario staycation tax credit. So I'm going to pass it forward to you.
Thank you. Notice of motion. It's whereas the temporary Ontario staycation tax credit was introduced in 2022 for leisure stays between January 1st, 2022 and December 31st, 2022. And whereas the Ontario staycation tax credit encourages Ontario families to explore the province while helping the tourism and hospitality sectors recover from the financial impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And whereas the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario has found that the Ontario staycation tax credit has encouraged visitors to stay in Ontario, book trips where they had never visited before, and spend more on a visit than normal, thus supporting local economies. And whereas the Ontario staycation tax credit has had a positive impact and showcases the breadth of local tourism experiences and incentivizes visitor spending. And whereas the domestic spending supports our local industries and keeps dollars earned in Ontario. in Ontario, and whereas the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario supports the extension of the Ontario Staycation Tax Credit through 2023, and that the credit be expanded to include transient boating in order to encourage Ontarians to visit waterfront communities. Now, therefore, the Corporation of the Town of Prescott supports the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario requests to the Minister of Finance to extend the Ontario Staycation Tax Credit until at least December 31st, 2023, and that a copy of this resolution be sent to the Honourable Peter Beth Linfalvy, MPP, Minister of Finance, the Honourable Stephen Clark, MPP for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes, Chris Bloor, President and CEO of Tourism Industry Association of Ontario, Dr. Jessica Ng, Director, Policy and Government Relations, Tourism Industry Association of Ontario, and all Leeds and Grenville municipalities.
Very good. Do you need a mover and a seconder? Sorry.
So the motion just goes to the table, providing the notice, and then it'll be discussed and debated, and the call for the question at the next meeting.
Okay. So debate it today?
Nope.
No debate tonight, just there. Gotcha. Very good. Good job reading that.
Thank you.
Just for reference, if you do pass it, the mayor will have to read it next.
Should have been paying attention then. All right, thank you very much. Moving on, there's no mayor's proclamation this evening, no media, no closed session, no rise and report. So moving right down to 21. Item is a confirming bylaw that we do every meeting. 54-2022, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting held on December 5th. Be read, December 12th. Be read and passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, and sealed by the seal of the corporation. Can I get a mover on that, please? Councillor Kirkby, Councillor Lockett, all in favor? Thank you. And the last one is the adjournment. The motion is that the council meeting be adjourned to Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023 at 6 p.m. Can I get a mover? Councillor Young and Councillor McConnell. At 8:02 p.m. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
Have a great holiday. And we will see you January 3rd.
I've been out